The hall on Veth Prime was built to make visitors feel small, not in a careless way, in a careful, deliberate way, the kind that takes architects and centuries and a very specific kind of contempt to get right. The ceiling rose so high that the lights at the top looked like they belonged to a different building. The walls were smooth and pale, the color of old teeth. Every surface had been chosen to remind whoever stood inside that they were a guest, and not a welcome one. Junho had stood in this room 41 times. He had counted. He sat at the long table, third seat from the left, same chair he had taken for 20 years. His hands were flat on the table. He had trained himself to do that early on. Still hands looked like patience. He had always been good at looking like patience. Across from him, the assembly's lead speaker was reading from a prepared statement. The speaker was a Veth elder who had held this position for longer than Earth had been a member of the assembly. Nobody in the human delegation knew his real name. They called him the Slab. Not because of how he looked, because of how he spoke. Every word landed like something dropped from a height. No feeling, no pause for effect. Just the weight of it, one word after the next. Earth's moon, designated Luna, will be placed under assembly neutral stewardship effective 60 days from signing. This is not a seizure. This is a cooperative arrangement for the interest of regional stability and the continued development of Earth's standing in the galactic community. The Slab set down his paper. He had not looked at Junho once during the entire reading. He never did. To Junho's right, the Kaldori Union representative sat with his arms folded and his expression somewhere between bored and satisfied. Behind the main table, 3 rows of assembly observers sat in tiered seats. Some were talking among themselves in low voices. A few were looking at their own screens. One appeared to be sleeping. Nobody in the room treated this like it was a serious conversation. That was the part that stayed with Junho even after 20 years. Not the demands. The demands had always come. It was the way they arrived, with the same flat certainty as weather, as gravity, as things that simply happen to smaller objects. He cleared his throat. We request 72 hours to consult the Earth Council on these terms. 48 hours will be sufficient, the Slab said. Not a counteroffer, not even a reply really. Just a number placed on the table, like the matter was already resolved. The room agreed with him, by saying nothing. The room always did. Junho nodded once. They filed out. The shuttle back smelled like recycled air, and the protein packs that Sungho's quartermaster always included because he did not trust Veth food. Junho had long stopped noticing the smell. It was just part of the trip home, like the low hum of the engine, and the way the cabin lights buzzed faintly at the rear end. He sat by the window. Outside, the stars did not appear to move. Everything was moving. None of it showed. Minji sat across from him. She was quiet for a while. She had a datapad open, and she was looking at it the way she looked at things when she had already decided what to do, but was waiting for the right moment to do it. Junho had worked with her for 16 years. He knew the look well. She turned the datapad around and slid it across the table to him. The document was long, organized by year. He read the top line, then scrolled, then stopped. Outer Belt Mining Rights, Zones 7 through 12, seeded. Year 7, Communication Relay Stations 3 of 5, transferred to Assembly Oversight. Year 11, Trade Route Corridor, Sections 14A through 14F, reclassified as Assembly Managed Space. Year 15, High Orbit Observation Satellites, decommissioned at Assembly request. Year 18, Weapons Research Treaty, 17 categories restricted. Each entry had a date, a description, and a short note in Minji's small, neat handwriting in the right column. The note on every single line said the same thing. Agreed. No resistance. He scrolled to the bottom. The last entry read, Year 20. Proposed Session of Luna to Assembly Neutral Stewardship. The note column was blank. She had left it blank. He looked at it for a moment and understood exactly why. "How long have you had this?" he said. "Since year 3. I kept waiting for someone to ask." He sat with that for a while. Outside the window, the stars held their positions. Inside the cabin, the engine hummed. His hands were still flat on the table, and the document was still in front of him. And he thought about the slab, reading from his prepared statement without looking up. He thought about the 48 hours, offered like something generous. He thought about the word cooperative, and all the shapes it had been bent into across 20 years of sessions in that room, with the ceiling too high and the walls too pale. He thought about Luna. His mother had pointed at it when he was 5. She had told him the names of the craters. He had not thought about that in years. He thought about it now. He closed the document. He calmed Yuna. She picked up quickly. It was late on Earth. She had been waiting. He did not explain the list or Minji's notations, or the blank column at the bottom. Yuna already had most of the information. She always did. What she needed from him was the part he had never given her before. "Don't sign it," he said. A long breath from her end. 20 years folded inside it. "Okay," she said. He cut the comm. Minji took her datapad back. She held it for a moment, then set it face down on the table like she was done with it. The shuttle flew on. The stars did not move. The air smelled the same. Junho leaned back, closed his eyes. Something had shifted underneath the floor of things. Quiet, slow, the way a fault line moves in deep rock. Nothing on the surface yet. Just the fact of it, final and patient. For the first time in 20 years, he fell asleep on the way home. The Kaldori fleet arrived at Luna's orbit on a Tuesday. 7 ships, not a war fleet. 7 ships was what you sent when you wanted someone to feel the pressure without giving them anything to call a threat. It was the Assembly's favorite kind of message, the kind that couldn't be argued against because it hadn't technically said anything. They designated it a peacekeeping presence. Sung-ho read the designation on his command deck and said nothing for 3 full minutes. His crew had learned over 8 years what that silence meant. It did not mean he was thinking. It meant he had already decided and was waiting for the situation to catch up to him. His second-in-command stood beside him, also looking at the feed, also saying nothing, because he had also learned. "Log their positions," Sung-ho said finally. "All 7. Update every 6 hours. And alert status, sir, stand down." He turned from the screen and walked to his chair and sat and picked up the mug of cold coffee that had been sitting there since morning and drank it without reacting to the temperature. His second-in-command marked the positions in the system log and did not ask anything else. On Earth, Yuna gave an address. She stood at the council podium in a dark jacket and spoke for 20 minutes with the kind of calm that takes years to learn and more years to keep. She used the word dialogue 4 times. She used partnership 3 times. She said shared future twice in the same paragraph, which her communications director had flagged as repetitive, and which she had kept anyway because the second use landed differently than the first, and she needed both. She did not mention Antarctica. She had been to the Antarctic facility 2 days prior. She had stood in a long corridor, lit by white overhead lights, and looked at things she did not fully understand, and listened to Heron explain them in the flat, certain way Heron explained everything, which was to say, with the assumption that you were smart enough to follow, and the confidence that she would not be repeating herself. What Heron had shown her was not in any treaty category. That was the thing, not because it had been hidden exactly, but because it could not be categorized under the terms that existed at the time the treaties were written. The assembly's restriction language covered weapons of certain yields, certain ranges, certain delivery mechanisms. Very specific, very thorough, written by people who knew weapons well. Heron had built something that didn't fit any of those categories. She had spent 11 years making sure of it. She was a small woman who wore the same kind of gray utility jacket every day and kept her workspace extremely clean, except for the one corner desk, covered in hand-drawn diagrams she refused to digitize. She had a habit of answering questions before they were fully asked, which annoyed people who didn't know her and saved enormous amounts of time with people who did. When Yuna had asked the obvious question, "Why didn't you tell anyone?" Heron had looked at her for a moment. "I told the Weapons Ethics Board in Year 3, she said. "They approved it. Nobody from the assembly ever asked to review it, because nobody from the assembly thought we were capable of producing anything worth reviewing." She had gone back to her diagrams after that. Yuna had stood in the white corridor for a while longer, looking at what 11 years of being underestimated looked like when it was finished. Minji found the message on a Thursday. It was not classified. That was the first thing. It was not in a restricted channel or behind a secured protocol. It was on the VET's secondary administrative frequency, which handled routine internal communications between council members. Meeting confirmations, resource allocation notices, the kind of traffic that generated enormous volume and very little content. No human had ever monitored it, because no human had ever learned the frequency's access protocol. The VET had used it for centuries without incident. They had no reason to believe anyone outside their species could navigate it. Minji had learned the protocol in Year 4. It had taken her 3 months. She had done it because she believed the most useful intelligence was never in the places people thought to lock. She had been monitoring the secondary frequency for 16 years. Most of it was exactly what it appeared to be: scheduling, logistics, the slow administrative machinery of a civilization that had been running for 4 centuries. She had read all of it carefully and patiently, the way she did everything, flagging perhaps one message in every few thousand as worth keeping. This one she flagged immediately. It was between 2 VET council members whose names translated roughly as senior and secondary administrative voices. The message was short. It had been sent the morning after Junho's request for 72 hours. It read, "They will yield. They always yield. They are a young species, still learning the cost of belonging." She read it twice. Then she forwarded it to Junho. No commentary. Just the message and the timestamp and the names of the 2 council members. Junho read it and forwarded it to Yuna. No commentary. Yuna read it and forwarded it to Sungho. No commentary. Sungho read it on the command deck of the Yongguang, still in low orbit. 7 Caldori ships sitting in Luna's orbital space, like furniture that had been moved in without being asked. He set the datapad down. He looked at the Caldori ships on the feed. 7 lights. Steady. Patient. Comfortable. He stayed like that for a moment. "How long until Heron is ready?" he said. His second-in-command had not known the question was coming, and took a second to follow it. I can reach out and ask, sir." "Do that." The reply came back in 4 minutes. His second-in-command read it, looked up, and had the specific expression of someone recalibrating something they thought they understood. "She says she's been ready for 2 years, sir. She was waiting to be asked." Sungho looked at the 7 lights on the feed. He picked up his coffee. It was cold again. He drank it anyway. "Tell her," he said, "that someone's asking." The session was scheduled for 9 in the morning, Veth Prime local time. Junho arrived 7 minutes early. He always arrived 7 minutes early. It was a habit he had built in Year 1 and kept, because punctuality in assembly sessions was read as eagerness, and eagerness was useful when you needed people to underestimate the room you were taking up. He sat in his chair, 3rd seat from the left, the same chair. Minji sat 2 seats down, her datapad open, her face calm. Yuna had stayed on Earth. She had wanted to come. Junho had told her to stay by the comms, because what happened after the session mattered more than the session itself. And he needed her there, not here. The chamber filled slowly. Assembly observers took their tiered seats. The Caldori representative arrived, and sat and folded his arms the same way he always folded them. A few looked at screens. Nobody looked at Junho. The assembly speaker, the slab, entered last. He moved to his place at the head of the long table, set down his papers, and did not look around the room, because he did not need to. He had presided over 43 formalization sessions in his 400-year tenure. Sessions where young species signed their names into the assembly order, and became, in the language of the official record, full galactic citizens. In the language of everything else, something smaller and more managed than they had been before. He believed in the process. That was the thing about him Junho had come to understand over 20 years. The slab was not cruel. He was certain. There was no gap between what he thought should happen and what he believed would happen. The two were the same thing, had always been the same thing, would always be the same thing. He cleared his throat. He began to speak. He welcomed humanity's maturity. He spoke about growth, about the long road toward full galactic citizenship, about the wisdom of cooperation. He said the word cooperation 5 times in 4 paragraphs. Each time, it landed the same way. Not like an invitation, like a designation, like something already decided that was being read aloud for the record. He talked about the future, the shared future, the stable and prosperous arrangement that awaited species who understood their place in the larger order of things. He talked for 11 minutes. Junho listened to all of it. He did not shift in his chair. He did not look at Minji. He kept his hands flat on the table, and his eyes on the slab, and he let every word arrive and pass through him, the way he had trained himself to let them pass, without reaction, without a ripple. The slab finished speaking. He reached beneath the table and produced the agreement. 32 pages, bound, the assembly seal at the top of the first page. He set it in front of Junho and placed a signing stylus beside it, parallel to the document's edge, perfectly straight. He folded his hands. He waited. Junho looked at the document. He looked at the seal. He looked at the stylus lying straight and ready beside it, like it had been waiting there his whole career. He looked at it for 4 seconds. Then he looked up. No. The word was not loud. It was not delivered with weight or heat or any of the things that might signal it was coming. It arrived, the same way the slab's words arrived, flat, final, already decided. The room did not react immediately. The translator feeds processed the word and delivered it, and the delegates heard it, and for a moment the chamber sat with it, unsure what to do, the way a room sounds when something falls and nobody is sure yet if it broke. The slab's expression did not change, but something behind it did. Ambassador Junho, the agreement has been. I heard you the first time, Junho said, 41 times. No. He stood up. The room noticed that. In 20 years of sessions, through every concession and negotiation and 48-hour window given like a gift, Junho had never stood without being invited to. It was such a small thing. It moved through the chamber like a current anyway. You have our final position, he said. The Caldori fleet will leave Luna's orbit in 6 hours. After that, we are not responsible for what they encounter. He picked up nothing from the table. He left the document where it was, and the stylus beside it, still perfectly straight. He walked out. Minji closed her datapad and followed without looking at anyone. On the Yangwang, Sungho had watched the session live on the command feed. When Junho stood, Sungho reached forward and cut the connection before the slab could respond. His crew did not comment. They had been at their station since before the session started. They stayed at them now. 6 hours, Sungho said to no one in particular. Yes, sir, his second-in-command said. Nobody moved. Nobody needed to be told what to do. They had been told already, days ago, in the way Sung-ho told things. Not with speeches, but with positioning, with the quiet redistribution of ships and systems that meant a decision had been made and the moment was simply being waited for. They waited. In the corridor outside the assembly chamber, Jun-ho stopped. It was a plain corridor. Pale walls, the same color as everything on Veth Prime. Overhead lights that buzzed faintly on the right side. A long stretch of nothing leading to the exit bay where the shuttle was waiting. He stood still. He had expected something physical when the moment came. A tremble in his hands, maybe. A flush of heat. Something the body did to mark 20 years finally turning over. His hands were still. He looked at them. Just his hands, flat and steady, same as they had been on the table. Same as they had been for 20 years of sessions in that room. He breathed out slowly. Then he kept walking. Minji matched his pace beside him. She did not speak. She had never needed to fill silence, and she did not fill it now. Their footsteps echoed in the empty corridor, steady and unhurried. Two people walking toward a shuttle, like the only thing left to do was get home. Outside, the stars were already out. 6 hours. The clock was running. The Kaldori fleet did not leave. 6 hours passed, then 7. The 7 ships sat in Luna's orbital space the same way they had sat there since Tuesday. Steady, lit, comfortable. Like furniture. Like something that belonged there and knew it. Their communique arrived at the Earth Council at the top of the 8th hour. Yuna read it at her desk. It was written in the formal assembly style, which meant it took 4 paragraphs to say what could have been said in 2 sentences. Stripped of the language, it said this: humanity was young. Humanity should think carefully. The assembly's patience, while considerable, was not something to test. A revised agreement could still be reached through proper channels. The door remained open. The last line read, "We trust Earth's leadership will make the wise choice." Yuna set the communique down. She calmed Sung-ho. He picked up on the first tone. "They stayed," she said. "I know," he said. "I watched." A pause that lasted 3 seconds, which between the two of them was a long conversation. "Heron says she's ready," Yuna said. "I know that too," he said. She cut the comm. On the Yongguang, Sung-ho stood from his chair. That was all he did. He stood. His crew read it the way they read everything he did. Not as performance, but as information. Stations that had been on passive monitoring shifted without being told. Systems that had been sitting quiet woke up. "Heron," he said into the open comm channel to the Antarctic facility. "I'm here," she said. Her voice had the same quality it always had. Not excited, not tense. Present. Like someone who had been waiting at a door and heard the knock and was simply opening it. Same configuration as the targeting simulation? "Close enough," she said. "I adjusted for their actual positions. They drifted 4 kilometers northeast of where your log had them. I corrected for it this morning." He had filed those position logs himself. She had taken them, adjusted for drift, and corrected her targeting before he had even made the call. He did not comment on this. It would have been like commenting on the weather. "On your mark then," he said. "Understood," she said. He looked at the feed. 7 lights in Luna's orbit. Steady and certain, and completely unaware that the range they were sitting at had been chosen for them 11 years ago by a small woman in a gray jacket, who had then spent a decade making very sure the paperwork agreed with her conclusions. "Mark," he said. What happened next took 6 minutes. No declaration was broadcast, no countdown, no warning of the kind the Kaldori tactical grid was designed to detect, because what Heron had built did not announce itself in any of the ways that grid had been programmed to watch for. It operated on principles the Assembly's weapons analysts had not thought to model, because they had not thought a young species would arrive at them. The Yongguang moved. 17 ships moved with it, Not charging, not in attack formation, just repositioning with the kind of calm that comes from having already decided. The Caldori fleet's tactical systems registered the movement and flagged it at low priority. The range was non-threatening, according to every model they carried. They had no reason to change that assessment. They did not get the chance. Heron's system activated. The Caldori fleet's propulsion went dark. All 7 ships, not destroyed. The hulls were intact, the crews were unharmed, the ships themselves were whole. Just dark. The way a room goes dark when you find the right switch. Clean. Total. Disabled was the word Heron had used in 3 separate meetings with 3 separate ethics boards over 2 years of arguments about the project. She had been very specific about that word. She had drawn the line herself and defended it and held it. The ships would stop. The crews would be fine. Nothing would be permanent. She had won all 3 arguments. 7 disabled ships sat in Luna's orbit. The running lights still on, which made it worse somehow. All that light, with nothing working behind it. The assembly emergency session opened 14 minutes after the Caldori fleet went dark. Veth Prime's administrative channels, including the secondary frequency Minji had been monitoring for 16 years, lit up with the kind of traffic that only moved when something had broken through the assembly's sense of how things were supposed to go. She sat in the shuttle with Junho and read the feeds in real time, her face doing nothing in particular, her fingers moving through the data with the unhurried efficiency of someone who had been waiting for this exact volume of information, and was now simply processing it. Junho sat across from her and watched her work and said nothing. Yuna sent her message from Earth. She had written it herself. No communications director, no review. It was 4 sentences. We have disabled, not destroyed, the Caldori fleet. We have done this as a courtesy. The next action will be your choice, not ours. We await your revised terms. She read it once, sent it, and did not read it again. The Sorel message arrived 22 minutes after Yuna's. It did not go to the assembly. It did not go through any official channel. It arrived directly to Yuna's personal council address, which was not publicly listed, and which the Sorel should not have had access to, and clearly had possessed for some time. 3 words. We were waiting. Yuna stared at it for a moment. Then she forwarded it to Junho without commentary, the same way everything had been forwarded in this chain. No words attached, just the thing itself, trusted to land. In Antarctica, Heron sat in the main operations room. The systems around her were quiet now. Everything that had been active for 6 minutes had returned to standby. The room was the same as it always was. Clean, white. The one corner desk, covered in hand-drawn diagrams, she had never moved to a screen. Someone brought her tea. She wrapped both hands around the cup. It was hot. She held it and looked at nothing in particular for a while. Was it enough? Her assistant asked from across the room. Young, careful, the kind of person who asked the questions everyone else was thinking. Heron considered the questions seriously, the way she considered everything. Ask me what the assembly does next, she said. Her assistant opened his mouth. Not now, she said. Tomorrow, when we know. She drank her tea. Outside, the Antarctic wind moved against the walls of the facility and found no way in. The assembly requested a summit. Not a session, a summit. In 40 years of dealings with humanity, the assembly had never once used that word. Sessions were what you held with species below you. Summits were what you held with equals. The distinction was written into assembly protocol going back 3 centuries, and everyone in the room, when the request was drafted, knew exactly what it meant to use it. They used it anyway. They did not have a lot of other options. Junho received the request on the shuttle back from Veth Prime. He read it once. He passed it to Minji without comment. She read it, noted the word, and passed it back. Neither of them said anything about it for a while. Then Minji said, "They used Summit." "I saw," Juno said. That was the whole conversation. They arrived at Veth Prime 4 days later. No fleet escort at the docking station. No visible security. Just Junho and Minji and Yuna, who had come this time because Junho had told her this one she should see in person. They walked through the station corridor toward the assembly complex, with nothing behind them but their own footsteps. The hall was the same. Ceiling too high, walls too pale, lights too far up to do much good. Junho had stood in this room 42 times now. He knew every surface of it. He knew the exact spot at the far end, where the floor had a slight uneven seam that the Veth had never bothered to fix, because they had never needed to impress anyone in this room. He sat down, third seat from the left, same chair. The slab entered. He moved to his place at the head of the table. He set down no papers. He had prepared no statement, or if he had decided not to use it. He looked across the table. He looked directly at Junho. He had not done that in 20 years. "Director General," he said, "we wish to discuss a path forward." Junho had been called ambassador for 2 decades. The title change had been filed 3 days ago. It had been sent to the Assembly's office the same morning. The fact that the slab used it now, correctly on the first word, told Junho that someone on the vet side had spent a careful 48 hours reading everything they had previously not bothered to read. "Good," Junho said. "We've written one." Minji placed the document on the table and slid it across. It stopped in front of the slab precisely. She had a way of doing things precisely that was not showy. It was just exact. The document was 11 pages, thin, clean. The assembly seal was not on it. Earth's was. Then he looked at the thickness of it or the lack of it, and something moved behind his expression. Not quite readable, but present. He picked it up and began to read. The room was quiet while he read. Yuna looked at the ceiling. She had been in enough rooms like this to know that looking at the ceiling was sometimes the most useful thing you could do while waiting. It looked like patience, and it kept your face from doing anything someone could read. Minji reviewed her notes. She had reviewed them 3 times already that morning. She did it a 4th time. Junho drank water. His staff on the vet side conferred in low voices at the edges of the room. 2 of them left through a side door and came back. One made a quiet call on a personal device. The assembly observers in the tiered seats were still for once, which was its own kind of signal. The slab set the document down after a long time. "Some of these terms are unprecedented," he said. "Yes," Juno said. "The clause regarding weapons development rights, the argument that the original treaty was invalid under Assembly Clause 7, subsection 3. Our legal team filed a full brief," Juno said. "You'll find it attached at the back. 12 pages, your own clause, written by the Veth Council 200 years ago. We didn't change a word of it." The slab was quiet. Heron's lawyers had found Clause 7, subsection 3, in year 6. They had sat on it for 14 years, while she built things that were never restricted, because the restriction language, measured against the clause, had never been properly ratified. Every treaty Earth had signed regarding weapons development was, under the Assembly's own foundational law, not valid. It was all in the brief, 12 pages, footnoted. "The Assembly will need time to review," the slab said. "You have 48 hours, Junho said. The same number, the same words, delivered with the same complete absence of tone that the slab had used for 20 years in this room. The same table, the same chair. Yuna stopped looking at the ceiling. Minji did not look up from her notes. But the corner of her mouth moved, just slightly, just for a moment. Before the session closed, the Seral representative stood. He had not addressed a human delegation directly in 40 years of assembly meetings. He was tall and gray and still, and had the quality of very old things that have decided to wait and have gotten extremely good at it. "We would like to open bilateral discussions with Earth," he said, "separately from the assembly, at your convenience." The room noticed. The assembly observers in the tiered seats noticed. The Caldori representative, present but silent all session, noticed. Yuna glanced at Juno. Juno looked at the Sorel representative for a long moment, not sizing him up, just looking, the way you look at something you've been aware of for a long time and are now deciding what to do about. "We know," Juno said. "We'll be in touch." The shuttle home smelled the same as it always had. Recycled air, protein packs in the supply bag, the faint buzz of the rear cabin lights. Juno sat by the window. The stars held their positions outside. Everything was moving. None of it showed. Minji sat across from him. She had her datapad open. She looked at it for a moment. The document she had shown him on this same shuttle a month ago. 40 years of concessions in a neat, organized list. Every line signed and yielded and noted in her small handwriting. She closed it. She looked at him. Then she deleted the file. He watched her do it. The datapad screen went plain and empty and blank, and she set it face down on the table between them and looked out her own window at the same stars. Neither of them spoke. There was nothing left to say about it. The list was gone. What came next had no category yet, no column, no notation. It was just open space. The shuttle flew on. Outside, the stars were the same stars they had always been,